So I'm just going to talk about a couple little areas in some very limited time that are very distressing for folks with dealing with some end-stage illnesses. And that's the changes in eating. This is where it becomes very emotionally difficult because this is where we like to heal. You know, eat, you'll feel better, right? And when you're in active treatment, it's important to eat, and it's important to keep the nutrition up so that you can combat it. But if you're dealing with end-stage illness, it's a whole different scenario for your body, and we have to recognize that your body's going through some changes. Their ability to process food starts to really diminish. And so if you force food when the body says no, you can, bloat up, cramp up, throw up, and then create some more discomfort. But it's difficult for those of us, and this is how we nurture you, to say, oh my gosh, you're not eating. You've got to be fed. And so I think, okay, my mom isn't eating. I've got to give her my famous chocolate mousse cake. And I make it and I give it to her, and she can take one little bite, if at all. And it's not that she's rejected the cake. It's that I feel rejected because it reminds me I'm helpless to change what's happening before my eyes. And so in my desperation, I'm going, okay, Mom, 4 more bites of applesauce, 4 more bites. Like 4 more bites is going to do anything to reverse what's happening. But what might happen is Mom might take 4 more bites because she can't afford to upset me as a caregiver and have me withdraw from her. So we really need to understand the dynamics of what's happening. When people are not eating, they go into ketosis, which really promotes a sense of well-being with the release of the endorphins, which is our natural morphine. But especially when we're dealing with cancer, just to be aware that if they're not eating, they're not dying because they're not eating. They're not eating because they're dying. The body's needs change. And again, with the wisdom of the body, we have to say, you tell me what you want or don't want. I want you comfortable, so if you can eat just a little bit and that makes you happy, I need to let it go. Now, I'm assuming, obviously, that other causes of lack of appetite have been handled. It's not because you're hurting, not because you're nauseated, not because your dentures don't fit, but you're simply at the point where the tumor has progressed to the point where you simply do not have the appetite. And this happens in many diseases across the board. This is not just cancer. What we know is that for people with a lot of end-stage illnesses, now like, say, strokes and Parkinson's, et cetera, and the point they're losing weight, the time that they're recommending tube feedings, well over 100 studies have shown that tube feedings not only do not promote living, they actually may hasten dying because they're more likely to get an aspiration pneumonia now because the stomach gets overfilled and it actually comes up and then goes into the lungs. Sometimes I'll have families saying, okay, I know she can't eat, but by gosh, we got 40 vitamins here, and we're going to do that. Well, here's a couple things. One is those vitamins cannot be absorbed into the body unless you have a certain amount of food and nutrition liquid in there. So if you don't have it, it's not going to be absorbed. But if any of you have ever had a multivitamin or a high level of iron on an empty stomach, you know it makes you feel pretty bad. So inadvertently, we're working with somebody. We give them their vitamins, and they're going to feel pretty bad the rest of the day. But here's the most important part, especially working with cancer patients. The point at which they are no longer able to eat much, they're starting to kind of waste away a little bit, which is very difficult to see. Something in the body's been released called cytokine, and that's doing a couple things. It's blocked their ability to store fat and protein, so even if you force-fed, it wouldn't do any good. But it's also blocked their desire to eat and drink, so which is why they're happy. And the reason the body in its wisdom did this is because it understands that the only cell that's going to benefit now is the cancer cell. And I remember a woman on the cancer ward that, she was at that point where she was very cachectic and losing weight, and we thought, hey, best intervention is total nutrition through an IV, in which we gave her. The next day I was on duty. Her tumor had tripled in size. We had fed the cancer. We had done nothing to promote her comfort. In fact, it increased her discomfort. So that's why we have to say, pay attention to the body and the use of appetite stimulants in end-stage illness as opposed to active chemotherapy. It's different. But near the end, it's not appropriate because it tries to override and get people eating at a point where their body's rejecting it, and they're going to probably feel worse. I'm looking at my timing, and I'm probably going to shorten a couple little things. Changes in energy. Let me just synopsize this to say, again, here's how your body's wisdom works. Most of us will say that if we had our druthers, we'd rather die in our sleep. When you're dealing with end-stage illness, essentially that's exactly what happens. Depending on your illness, you go into a coma, whether that coma is minutes or whether that coma is weeks. Isn't it nice that your body will essentially put you to sleep and while your body continues to shut down? So we have to be aware that that idea that your energy changes, your ability to do things, your desire to sleep more and more is a natural part of the process. Does not mean somebody's overdosing. That's part of the process, even for folks who aren't taking any medications whatsoever. But even so, even if somebody's in a coma, even if somebody hasn't recognized you, know that hearing is the last to go. Continue to talk. Continue to touch. Continue to hold. I remember walking through the halls and looking in a room, and a little lady was sitting at the head of the bed of her husband, married 65 years. He was in his last 2 hours of life, and she was reaching through the side rails to hold on to his little wrist. And I just instinctively walked in there and I said, "Do you need to climb up there and hold him?" She was so grateful. So she climbed up in bed, and I closed the door, and she got to hold the love of her life while he was dying. What an important memory for her, and how wonderful for him to be embraced in that love while he was dying. We just don't touch enough. You know, we do it naturally with mothers who are losing their children to say, touch them, hold them. But I've got to tell you, if I'm 93 years old and that's my 70-year-old son that's dying, that's still my baby. And we need to touch and we need to hold. So if you're one of the healthcare practitioners listening, encourage people to do that. Move the tubes, get the pillows in. Make it easy for somebody to be held if, in fact, both the patient and the family are liking that. The breathing issues, let me just touch this very quickly, especially if somebody's got lung cancer. They're terrified that over time, gosh, I'm not breathing as well. I'm going to be gasping for air when I die. But this is what the body's wisdom is going to be doing for you. As you're getting very close to the dying, to the very end, your oxygen level naturally goes lower. Your CO2 level goes up, and that's the point at which you go into the coma. All struggle is gone. You're comfortable. It is wonderful. And we can manage breathing until then with a combination of medications. The challenge is if you've got somebody in a hospital, they put that little oximeter, that little thing to measure oxygen on your finger, and we start listening to an alarm rather than looking at the person who's comfortable. So if somebody you know is dying and it's expected, keep the machines away. Just look at the person, look at their face, it's usually very comfortable, and manage it from there. I think the only thing harder than talking about dying is not talking about dying. This is our time to be very authentic. This is our time to get some closure. So being able to tell our stories, to say goodbye, is going to be really important for anybody, because otherwise you're left with the unsaids. I remember there was a woman who was dying of kidney cancer, and her children were with her, and they knew Mom was dying. But she was holding on and holding on. We thought, what's happening here? Well, finally I overheard the kids holding on to Mom and saying, "Mom, you're going to be okay. You're going to feel better tomorrow. We'll get you in a wheelchair. We'll get you stronger. We're going to take that trip to Hawaii." Mom heard, "We're not ready to let you go." So I talked to the husband, and he pulled the kids aside, and they came back again a couple minutes later, and they tearfully held on to their mom's hand, and they said, "Mom, we love you. We're going to miss you, and we'll be okay." Mom relaxed, and within 10 minutes, she had died. So being able to let somebody go despite our grief is sometimes an important thing to do. It's never going to be okay that somebody we love die, but being able to love them enough to say, you can go, and hopefully I'll see you again sometime. That's really helpful. The timing of death, these are one of the fabulous mysteries. What I've learned over the years, and I let families know ahead of time, people choose their time to die. If you're supposed to be with them, you will. If you're not supposed to be with them, you don't. Don't put a judgment on it. You were there, you were good because you were there, you were bad because you weren't. That wasn't the way it was supposed to be. How many people died at change of shift because nobody was bothering them? How many people waited for somebody to show up or waited for somebody to leave the room? So I ask families to acknowledge, to look at the fact that there's going to be some meaning in the timing. Don't take it personally. Find out what it was for that person. I was pronouncing the death of somebody in the South Tucson, and this story came out from the son. We weren't sure he was going to get here in time for his mom, who was dying of cancer. And her wish was, I want my son home safe on the ground, because he was coming from Iraq. He was in the service. Well, he finally was racing home. As soon as the plane landed on the tarmac, he whipped open the cell phone. He called home. His father put the phone up to his mother's ear, and he said, Mom, I'm on the ground. I'll be home in 20 minutes. She whispered, I love you. And then 2 minutes later, she died. As he told me that, I thought, oh, you got so close. And he goes, oh, no, my mom knew me. I would have had a real hard time seeing that last breath, but to have heard her words and to see her in beautiful repose was perfect. And for her, it was her wish. My son is safe on the ground. I can go now. Visions, I got to tell you, I didn't used to believe in them. My patients have taught me a lot over the years. And it really doesn't matter if we don't believe in visions. What matters is if the person's having the experience, it means something to them. So it helps us to understand what is this transition for them. And if they're able to talk about it, I think there's a special blessing. So I'll just share one quick story. My friend Joan was attending the dying of a young man, 27-year-old with cancer. They had surrounded his bed at home. And he looked at the end of the bed and he said, who's that little boy at the end of the bed? Well, nobody else saw him, so he described him, about 3, blonde hair. Mother went running out of the room. She came back a couple minutes later with a picture of a little blonde 3-year-old boy. He pointed to him and said, yes, that's his picture. How did you get him? She'd never told him he had a brother who died before he was born, and that was him. So in the midst of the pain of losing another son, there was that little bit of comfort that, wow, they're together? Maybe I'll see them someday? So what we need to know is that when we're all going to go through a life cycle. We're all going to die someday. We have to honor that life. We have to honor our own grief and loss. So I love these things. What you leave behind is not engraved in stone monuments, but what's woven into the hearts of others. So whether you're the nurse, the patient, the family member. And that just because they're physically gone doesn't mean they're ever gone from the heart. So for me, the bottom line is a good death does honor to a whole life. Navigate decision-making, base it on your values and your goals. Understand that when you're getting to the end of life, how is the body going to work and to shut down? How to manage that to promote comfort, how to get the best possible closure. And then step aside and look for the mystery. Because then we as survivors take that to our next death and then to our own death. And as difficult as death is going to be, I cannot take away the sting of that. We don't have that extra sting of, I didn't know, I wasn't prepared. So I'm just going to leave this honoring slide there and open it up to questions. And boy, that's a lot of information to cover quickly. Anyway.